back in the early 90s, there was a young boy in Russia by the name of Ivan Mishakov, 4 years old, living in a very dysfunctional family. Mother was very violent, father was alcoholic. And so at the age of 4, he decided to run away from home. And he joined the nearly million young people living on the streets of Moscow. Now that in itself is quite disastrous, that a 4-year-old would be now living homeless on the streets. But of course, this was Moscow, where in winter it would regularly get to -20. And so this child had to do everything he could to survive. He would steal food, but even then he would not be warm enough. And so this one day he came across a pack of dogs who were living on the street. And he realized that in exchange for food, they would allow him to curl up next to them at nighttime so that he wouldn't freeze to death. Now, over time, this became a bit of a useful relationship where they would protect him and he would be able to steal food to provide for them. This went on for a couple of years, pretty much from the age of 4 until about the age of 6. Young Ivan actually started to learn how to communicate with the dogs through growling, barking. He was eventually made the leader of the pack. And so eventually the police in Moscow started to receive reports of this young boy traveling with a pack of dogs who couldn't actually speak English. Obviously his home life had been so dysfunctional up until that point that he really hadn't learned much at all. And so he was sounding and acting like a dog. The police tried a number of times to set him free from this pack, but every time the other dogs would attack the police to protect their leader. Eventually they were able to use some meat as a way of luring the dogs into a building and then lock the door, and were able to then grab hold of the young boy. But even at that point, young Ivan was supposedly growling and barking and biting the police officers. It took a long time for him to go through rehabilitation, to enter back into the world of humanity and learn how to speak again, learn how to relate with people in a human kind of way. Even then, as a teenager, many years later, as he was studying, he would talk about the fact that he would, at nighttime, dream that he was still a dog. This story fascinated me when I first heard it, because I think it creates for us an amazing parable of the journey of humanity, really. Because in the beginning, we were made for greatness. In the beginning, we were created to be with God and to share something of that divine nature, of that true glory that we were made for. But we left home. We abandoned the Garden of Eden. And from that point on, humanity kind of became more like a pack of animals, fighting, manipulating, stealing, using each other to get whatever we needed to fill that emptiness inside of our hearts. And it's that emptiness, that survival instinct, which I think is what's driven us. In the book of Genesis, when it talks about the experience of the fall from the Garden of Eden, it talks about how when Eve looked upon the fruit in the garden, and it says that for the first time, she kind of saw her own emptiness. Up until that point, whenever they looked at creation, they saw God. They saw the love of God being poured out for them. But for the first time, it says that Eve looked upon the fruit and she saw that it was delightful to the eyes, good to eat, pleasant to taste. She saw her own emptiness. That's all that she could see. And this beautiful creation of God was simply something to fill that emptiness. Ever since that moment in the garden, our eyesight has been damaged. Ironically, it says in the book of Genesis that after she ate the fruit, her eyes were opened. And people often wrestle about what does that actually mean. Personally, I think it means her eyes were open to her emptiness. for the first time. And ever since then, our vision has been damaged, disordered, because we see everything through the lens of our own emptiness. Anytime you look at someone, you look to see how useful are they? Are they going to make my day happier? Are they going to help me become wealthy? Are they going to make me, filled with pleasure? Can I use them in some way? It's all about me. It's all about my needs. And even when we believe that we are being loving and laying our life down in sacrifice, so often this emptiness still taints everything. There's always some element of our own insecurity or vanity or pride or lust coming through everything because our vision of the world has become so damaged. I start with those two images because if we're going to talk about vocation, we need to firstly understand whether we can see correctly. But we also need to realize that really the purpose of vocation is for the sake of healing our sight. See, vocation is not just simply something we do to make God happy. It's not like a place where I try and rack up good deeds so I can get reward. My vocation becomes a place where I'm going to be healed. It's a place through which God works His great grace of salvation in me and then through me to the whole world. And so we need to understand something of this grace of purity that God wants to work in our hearts. Sadly, we often talk about purity only in the context of sexuality. And even then, it's only in the context of trying not to enter into mortal sin. And so it becomes all about rules and sacrifice and how far can I go before I've gone too far. Whereas really, it's about becoming human. If we go back to that image of Ivan, this young boy who had forgotten what it was to be human. He'd become like an animal. And he then had to go through a long journey of rehabilitating himself, of entering back into the world of humanity and learning how to interact in a human way. That is basically the journey of conversion. That's the journey of discipleship. We all live in this survival mentality. How do I get what I need just so I can get through another day, so that life has some sort of purpose? And yet Christ opens up for us a bigger, more glorious vision, a vision where we're being drawn into an eternal relationship with the divine. As the Catechism says, heaven is to enter into the heart of the Trinity, to enter into that place of infinite love. And so I need to learn how to love. I need to be turned inside out, if you will. It's where I've been so focused inwards on my needs, my emptiness, and trying to take all of God's creation to fill this gaping hole inside my heart. I now have to turn myself outwards and realize that I don't need to be afraid of the emptiness anymore because Christ dwells there in the side of my heart. Rather than living in this sort of panic of whether I've had enough, whether I've missed out on any pleasure today, or whether I've got all the opportunities I need, Christ calls us instead to a place where we stand confident that He will provide, as He provided for those in the desert as they were on the way to the promised land. And yet every day, they were panicking. They were afraid that they weren't going to have enough. Always looking back to Egypt, to the place where they had their cucumbers and garlic and onions and slavery and burdens and chains. We can be in the same place where God wants to provide for us. He wants to give us everything our heart needs. But He's calling us to step away from that fearful, panic place in our hearts where we're always looking back at what we're missing out. Or maybe a bit like that young boy Ivan, where every night he would dream about being a dog, even though he was now living in the life of a human. This is where we find ourselves in the journey. And this is where you find yourself as you try to discern your vocation. And this is why discernment is difficult. Because as much as you may believe that you're trying to follow the voice of God, there is always still that other voice looking back to Egypt, or looking back to the life as an animal, or looking back to the emptiness. And so, as much as we're trying to hear the voice of God, we need to be aware of whether we're actually listening to the voice of the hunger inside of us, the emptiness. The emptiness which says, I want to serve God, but I need these things. I can't live without them. This is why vocation is a really key part of our healing. God wants to draw us into a way of life which is going to help us be turned inside out. He's going to help us to learn how to trust that He will provide. A way of life which is going to truly lead us to the promised land, where we know the true fulfillment of our desire will be reached. Every Christian is called to a life of chastity. And as I said before, sadly, when we hear that word chastity, we start to think of it in terms of rules and how far can I go before I've committed a mortal sin. Whereas really chastity is about learning how to see correctly. As Jesus says in the Beatitudes, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Or rather, blessed are those who can see God, because they're the ones who are pure in heart. You see, chastity is about being able to look at creation and see the Creator. Sometimes we use that image of a birthday present or a Christmas present, beautifully wrapped up in wrapping paper with a ribbon around it. When a child looks at that present, all that they can see is the wrapping paper. And they very quickly tear off the wrapping paper and go into the corner and play with it because it's pretty and it's nice colors. They don't even recognize that there's something hidden inside. That image is sometimes used in terms of how we relate with human beings. You might look at someone who is beautiful and all you see is the surface. You can't see the inside. In fact, you probably don't want to see the inside. You just want the wrapping paper. But it's not only in terms of relationships. This also happens in terms of work and economics. When you look at someone that works for you and all you see is their strength or their intelligence and the fact that they can make you money, you don't want to know their family problems. You don't want to know their insecurities and their baggage and their fears or their hopes and dreams. We do this with everybody. We only engage with the surface of humanity. And so this idea of chastity is actually so much bigger than just sex. It's about learning how to engage with the complete person, the whole mystery of who they are. Now, whether that's someone you're marrying or whether that's someone who's working for you, it's the same thing. How do I actually encounter the full humanity of this person? But then the next stage of that is being able to recognize the creator of that person. Because I suppose when someone gives you a birthday present, you see the wrapping paper and then you see the present. But if you're really alert, if you can really see correctly, you're going to recognize the person who gave you the present. And you're going to start to realize that actually the present is not really important. This is just a symbol of the love that this person has for you. So really, the real gift is the giver of the gift. In the same way, when we look at creation, we can see its usefulness for us. You can also then start to see the inner mystery and the real hidden beauty. But can we see God? Can we see the one who created that gift? This is really, as I said, the heart of purity. Purity is about learning how to see correctly. And so God wants to call us into a way of life which is going to train us for this. In the context of marriage, marriage is really about learning how to see God in your wife, how to see the Creator in your children. And that's really where the power and the beauty of marriage comes alive. Because it's not about you. It's not about you trying to fill your own emptiness or entering into some sort of contract with your wife where you meet her needs and you meet her needs and she meets yours. It's more about rejoicing. It's about worship. It's about praising God for His love revealed to you through this gift, which is this person. You see, because at the heart of chastity, at the heart of purity, we find worship. If we can see correctly, our hearts are naturally going to be drawn to thanksgiving for the one who has loved us so much. For us as consecrated men, we live evangelical chastity. Now, we put that extra word on the front of it because we're trying to say that this is a chastity which in some sense is prophetic. It's a chastity which is trying to remind the world where we are going and really what we were truly made for. That our relationships don't end here on earth, but rather our relationships reach their fulfillment in eternity. Pope John Paul II spoke about this at length in his Theology of the Body, where he spoke about that passage in the Gospel where Jesus says that in eternity there will be no marriage. And JP2 goes on to say that really what this is revealing to us is that marriage is just like a street sign pointing us to the fulfillment. It's not actually the whole reality that God wants to give us. Heaven is going to be a place where every relationship is so open and vulnerable and intimate that it's going to make marriage look like a mere shadow compared to the glory of what we're going to experience there. And so this is where evangelical chastity becomes a bit of a prophetic message to the world. It tries to reveal to the world that, we're made for more than this. In a world that has kind of made sex into a god and is constantly saying, you're going to miss out. What we're trying to proclaim to the world is, we're not going to miss out. There is so much more to the story that we're part of than what we actually are aware of. Marriage, as beautiful and as sacred as it is simply just like a street sign pointing us to eternity. As consecrated men and women, we're basically trying to start to live our relationships as though we're already in eternity. We start to live with everyone as though they are our brothers and sisters. We seek to lay our life down for everybody. We seek to live in this way of real purity, understanding that we're not going to miss out, but rather we're already stepping into our inheritance. And as I said, the mark of this is worship. Wherever there is chastity, wherever there is real purity, you're going to find thanksgiving and worship because the person's eyes are opened to see the gift that's been given to them. And I think this is why you would find that consecrated men and women are so filled with joy. Our society can't make sense of this because everything in the media tells us that if you're not having sex, then you've got no reason to be happy. Whereas for us, it's quite the opposite. It's that we're living our lives with our eyes open to the gift of heaven. This gift of infinite love revealed through everything. And I think because our life is devoted to seeing love, we then spend our whole life rejoicing in worship and thanksgiving for that love. That's the prophetic message at the heart of consecrated life. That joy is just overwhelming and overflowing outwards to the world in which we live. The journey into this, I think, really needs to be done with our eyes fixed firmly on Christ. If you try to discern your vocation by looking back to Egypt, as the Israelites did, you're never going to reach the promised land. No matter how much Moses tried to reveal to them the beauty of where they were going, they were constantly filled with this fear of missing out. And they kept looking back to Egypt and regretting that they'd ever left. They never reached the promised land. Sadly, so many Christians spend their life in that place, in the desert. God is presenting us with so much love, such an amazing glory given to us. And yet we spend our life looking back and thinking, oh, we wish we had what everyone else had. If you're going to engage in discernment, you need to set your gaze firmly on this mystery of eternity, this mystery of the infinite love revealed to us in the Trinity, the love that's going to satisfy every human need. And in light of that, devote yourself to this journey of being turned outwards. Don't live that half-hearted life where you do a little bit of sacrifice to keep other people happy, but you live mostly for yourself. My challenge to you is have the courage to give everything and to really place yourself in the hands of God to allow Him to do this transformation in you. In a world which is constantly running away and going to video games and going to more pleasure and more distraction, it's about learning how to love, learning how to let God purify our sight, cleanse us of all the impurity, so that we can truly set our gaze upon heaven and we can just rejoice. Instead of living this half-hearted existence where we're seeking God, but we're also seeking Egypt, the old way of life. It's about letting God transform us into being truly human. It is a beautiful way of life. If you do feel called to consecrated life, go with joy. Understand that God is inviting you into a place where you're going to find a joy that very few people ever discover. So as you go on this journey, I really pray for you. Discern well. Don't discern out of your hunger, but discern truly seeking Christ and setting your gaze upon the promise He has for you.